5 truths I discovered whilst hanging out with the super rich and the elites. The first time I sat at a table with billionaires, I thought I'd feel small, and I did. For about 10 minutes. But then I started paying attention and everything I knew back then changed. I spent years inside the world of the ultra-rich, not watching from the outside, inside, at the tables, on the yachts, and in the rooms where the conversations happen and the deals close. And what I found out was nothing like what the world shows you. I was just an unknown 28-year-old boy without a pot to pissing, thinking he was going for a lunch with a rich guy. I'd convinced some high-end real estate broker that I was a young hotshot and an heir to a shipping fortune. And he was, of course, eager to make a buck by putting people together. So he set me up with one of his best clients. He even vouched for me. I'd planned my pitch perfectly. I knew I could make this guy see my vision and cut me $1 million check. I'd psyched myself up, showed up on time, and I looked like a movie star oozing in confidence. It was a restaurant in Aventura, Florida, just north of Miami. An expensive one by the water, the perfect setting for a seduction. But when I showed up, it wasn't just him. He was holding court with 5 of his billionaire buddies and their respective entourage of Klingons and sycophants. Food everywhere, drinks had been flowing for a while, and the energy in the room was electric. So as I arrived, he greeted me warmly, announcing they were celebrating. He'd just won a $400 million lawsuit against his father. I mean, that last piece of information was a slap on the face, telling me I was suddenly in a completely different universe. And after a warm welcome, I was sat at the opposite end of a very long table, far from my intended target, between a suited sycophant chasing money and a stripper on standby for someone's next blowjob. I thought I would feel small. Well, I was right. Sure, I was disappointed. My pitch was dead before I ever started. But then I remembered something. No plan survives first contact with the enemy, or as Mike Tyson likes to put it, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. So as I sat there watching, listening, analyzing everything I saw, I was amazed at what you can pick up when you just shut up and pay attention. I identified personalities, insecurities, desires, passions, dislikes, all whilst the stripper talked my ear off and made sure I had her number. I figured her out too, which came in handy later that evening. That was the day I was initiated into the world of the elite. And because I paid attention, learned, and used that knowledge to my benefit, my exposure to the world of billionaires and stratosphere players became very real. I eventually got my $1 million check from him and 4 of his buddies at that table. Unfortunately, the last guy was apparently immune to my charms, but that happens sometimes. And whilst I felt small sitting there at the end of the table, next to Candy with an eye, I didn't feel small for long. Because once you figure out these intimidating giants and you can isolate them from the thing that gives them power, then the dynamics change. Then they're just people. No different to you or me. But there's a quick caveat. Everything I'm about to share with you comes from years of direct experience with these rare and powerful individuals. Mostly male, a few female. These are generalizations though. And yes, there are always exceptions to the rule. Just not that many. The first truth I learned about this elusive species is that they are infectious. Not disease infectious, opportunity infectious. Contacts, lifestyle, relationships, their entire ecosystem becomes available to you if you play it right. 24 hours after my original guy signed a $1.5 million check, I'd officially been accepted into their clan, into their trust, and found myself on one of 2 Gulfstream private jets, literally racing between Palm Beach and the Hamptons for his daughter's wedding weekend. And the events around the wedding, we stayed on a mega yacht in Sag Harbor, ironically named Fearless, and the events around the wedding were as star-studded and glamorous as you would expect. The people I met, discussions I initiated, relationships I seeded that weekend made me a fortune and set the course of my life beyond my wildest dreams. When you attach yourself to the elite in a way where they recognize some kind of value, they actually rub off on you. How they think, their standards, their relentless appetite for scale, all of it starts to live inside you. But there's also the other part that nobody warns you about, their dysfunction. That rubs off on you too. Which brings me to the second truth. Hypocrisy is everywhere. You would think wielding great power and wealth gives you the ultimate freedom to do and say what you like. The problem is that great wealth creates reputation, and reputation, normally nothing like the truth. Character is who you are, reputation is who people think you are, and the elite suffer a great burden of being slaves to their reputation, even if that means ignoring their character. It comes down to loss. When you have nothing to lose, you are indeed free to act without consequence. That's not necessarily a good thing, but it is the very definition of freedom. The more you have, the more you have to lose, and your freedom reduces by an equal degree. Some people would think never obtaining wealth or security is a bad thing. True, but having wealth and then losing it being left with nothing is 1,000 times worse. You can't miss what you never had, and the fear of losing their wealth, status, and lifestyle is absolutely terrifying to them. It's their kryptonite, and nothing can destroy your status or lifestyle as quickly as reputation. It doesn't even need to be real. You could be the nicest, most popular, and wealthy person in the neighborhood. Someone starts a completely false but believable rumor about you, then suddenly you become the center of gossip. If that gossip builds momentum, it becomes reputation. People stop returning your calls. Eventually they avoid you. First you lose your status, then your lifestyle suffers. If taken to the extreme, destroying your wealth is not that much of a leap. Reputation is everything to them, and that means they have to hide. Stay true to their reputation when anyone is watching, but let their character out for a walk when behind closed doors. Their beliefs on racism, law, social values, ethic, their business, and their lives may look as clean as a baby's ass, and they may declare the importance of morality, but that doesn't mean they don't engage in cutthroat or illegal tactics to enrich themselves, or have zero ethical accountability on their actions as long as they are on the right side of the law. Even that they don't mind breaking as long as they can be guaranteed not to be caught. This species of human doesn't mind breaking the law, it's getting caught that's shameful. And while all of the above topics are important, nothing brings out virulent hypocrisy in the elite more than sex. Yep, that primal force that creates unstoppable desire, especially when you have enough money to do and then hide anything. On the surface, good old marital values, missionary position ideologies, clean, easy, no kinks, and certainly no perversions. Behind the scenes, debauchery. That's not an opinion. Again, it's something I've seen firsthand. I used to live in the wealthiest town in America, a bastion of conservative values where I was by far the youngest and least wealthy, but the most fun of my neighbors. A collection of people with similar interests would meet once a month, sometimes more, behind the closed and guarded gates of someone's mega mansion, sometimes mine. Their shared interests? Watching other men sleep with their wives, sometimes alone, sometimes in groups, sometimes dressed up in elegant courtesan outfits, other times tied up spread-eagled and let's say completely at somebody else's mercy. They may have been blue bloods with spotless reputations, but they weren't merely swingers. They were the founders of a modern-day Sodom and Gomorrah. Don't get me wrong, I was one of them, but everyone who knew me knew I was kinky and outlandish guy. These guys were all squeaky clean CEOs and lawyers, billionaires and philanthropists, developers, politicians, financiers, tech gurus, and many more, all participated in a scene that would make Stanley Kubrick blush. So my second lesson with these guys, usually what you see on the surface is diametrically opposed to what lies beneath. If you can figure that out, then you gain a massive advantage over them. Lesson number 3 is what I call the strip down. Their power comes from what they have, not who they are. As I said earlier, these individuals are no different from you and me. Actually, in most cases, they're worse off than the average person because wealth made them comfortable. It isolated them from pain. And without pain, true strength is hard to breathe. These people, again, mainly men, show strength through the facilities and capabilities wealth has allowed them to build. Their homes, their cars, bodyguards, employees, status and influence. Their class is their strength. But money doesn't buy you class. It merely buys you tolerance for the lack of it. You remove the money and all the things it has allowed them to acquire, and their strength just evaporates. I'm not saying you take their wealth. What I'm saying is put them in a situation where none of it is there. No mansion, no entourage, no title, and no armor. Just them. And suddenly, the most powerful person in the room is just a person. What kind of scenario? Well, an extreme example would be when they are in a prison. Take a wealthy elitist and throw them in the real prison, wearing a jumpsuit, sharing a cell with a violent criminal, and suddenly, they're not so elite anymore. Now they're in the jungle, and they're not equipped for the hunt. Now the predator becomes prey. But that's an extreme example, so let's go somewhere simpler. In a sauna, on a beach, in the gym, or my personal favorite, in a threesome with his wife. The power dynamic is now open to renegotiation. Lesson number 4 is the cowardice of the powerful. Having nothing to lose generates courage. Having everything breeds fear. Fear of losing it, fear of doing the wrong thing, fear of being exposed or ridiculed. Throughout the ages, we've been told of historical figures or mythical heroes risking everything to accomplish some magnificent feat. But rarely have these intrepid risk-takers been oligarchs and elitists. Short of Bruce Wayne and Iron Man, the courage required to risk everything is exclusively for those without that much. The ultra-rich is famous for being hard to approach and even harder to sell to. Why? Because they're cautious. But in this case, cautious isn't a synonym for careful. It implies afraid. When you know this, you begin to understand how these people think. And if you know how they think, then you realize how to manipulate. If you can identify their most profound fears, you can leverage them to your advantage. Many years ago, I'd sold some property to a large public company whose CEO was a bit of a prick. They'd paid me a huge down payment for my property, but before closing the deal and giving me another 20 mil, the market shifted. Despite binding contracts, he tried to back out, refused to pay me what he owed, and even demanded a return of the millions he'd already paid me. When I insisted I would hold him to his contract, he became a dick. Told me hell would freeze over before I was paid. And they had a legion of attorneys who would drag this through purgatory till I retired. Litigation would have been a conventional approach, but I knew something else. I knew he was rumored to spend every Friday evening having dinner at the same restaurant. I knew he always had a tendency to flirt with pretty women at the bar after dinner. I also knew he had a squeaky clean reputation as the CEO of a public company and a wife and 2 daughters at home. So a set of circumstances was engineered. One Friday he had dinner. He had a few drinks. He did his flirting. This time with a statuesque blonde from Texas called Carolyn who was visiting family in town. They drank, they giggled, they touched. Eventually, they went to her hotel and had sex for a good hour and a half. I also happened to know Carolyn. So when this guy was having Sunday lunch at the club with his family, surrounded by his peers, his friends, and his pretenses, he was surprised to see me sitting alone at the table nearby. He ignored me. But when Carolyn walked into the room, in a dazzling red dress that drew every eye in the place, his jaw dropped. When he saw her walk over to me and give me an intimate kiss before passing me what looked like a small videotape as her guest swept over him, well, at that point, I think he started drooling. So we had lunch, all whilst I openly played with the tape in my hand and he sweated. Monday morning, I sent him a strongly worded email asking for payment of what he owed. Otherwise, I would be forced to take diverse legal action. I was paid the same afternoon. Of course, there was nothing on the tape. They didn't have to be. His own fears did everything that was needed to compel him to do what he didn't want to do. I simply gave him the opportunity to confront his fears, and he acted exactly as men like him always do to protect what they have. And once you see that fear sits beneath so much of their power, the next lesson becomes impossible to miss. So the final lesson, lesson number 5, is this. For many of these people, nothing ever feels like enough. More money, more status, more success, more attention. And yes, that hunger is often part of what helped them get to where they are. It drives them to build, achieve, and keep moving forward. But it also has a downside. Because when you're always chasing more, it becomes very hard to enjoy what you already have. That was one of the biggest lessons I learned from these guys. Success does not always bring peace. In fact, the more someone has, the easier it can be to stop appreciating it. The more houses you own, the less any place feels special. The more praise you get, the less it means. The more you have, the harder it can be to feel satisfied. That's the irony. Ambition can help you build a great life, but gratitude is what helps you enjoy it. And if you spend your whole life chasing the next thing, you may lose the one thing you can never get back. Time. A young person may dream of becoming a billionaire, but many older billionaires would give everything they have to be young again. That's the real lesson. Money can bring comfort, freedom, and opportunity, but real wealth is also being able to enjoy your life whilst you live it. That, to me, is what truly matters. In the end, that was the real lesson. The closer I got to wealth and power, the less impressive it became, because behind the image, there was often the same fear, insecurity, hunger, and emptiness that drives everyone else, just dressed up in better clothes. That's when I stopped being dazzled by the elite. Once you see that so much of their world is built on appearances, performance, and the fear of losing what they have, you stop seeing giants and start seeing people. If you like this video, make sure you like and subscribe and leave a comment below. Which of these 5 truths do you think is the most accurate?